Yep. So look, Mr. Chair, councillors, this is just a report on our activities. So now that we've moved to a more shared service approach, what we want to do is just report back to each of our partners, I suppose, in terms of the 5 councils. So the same report will be going to each of the 5 councils, but it gives you an outline of what we've been up to for the 2017-18 year. So bearing in mind that was for the last financial year. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Right, that's a really good report. That's excellent.
Short and sweet.
Righto, questions for Ian?
What should we be concerned about?
Yeah.
What should we be concerned about? I think probably the biggest concerns for us is really around risk reduction at the moment, long-term risk reduction. I think that's probably with the area that worries me the most in terms of land use planning, etc. Because as we get more and more information around our hazard profile, and in particular the Hikurangi Trench and the subduction zone and what that potentially could produce for us, the long-term land use planning in particular for Napier, Clive, Ahuriri, West Shore in particular, I think that's an area that we're going to have to look at sooner rather than later.
Do you think that you've learned something that is that should cause a rethink of any of what Peter's committee has been doing in terms of remediation or their various plans for those different cells?
Yeah, the tsunami inundation zones were actually built into that work, so his committee actually took that into account. I think probably where it needs to be considered as part of the local councils, the TLAs and their long-term land use planning. So like the Napier City Council is now reviewing its district plan, and so we've been involved in trying to obviously advocate around hazard reduction, and we'll continue to do so. The local councils.
Neil?
Just continuing on that line, with those conversations, you're obviously considering infrastructure of those respective councils. I'm thinking now about, sort of, if you like, the drainage network, and most likely, well, you could tell me if I'm correct or not. Yep. The most likely scenario, such as we've had in Westland the last couple of days, is this major storm event, very isolated. Developing our infrastructure to match that.
Yeah, so we work on we have a risk profile for Hawke's Bay, which includes all our hazards, and obviously storms and flooding is one of those. And we do build in climate change into that modelling, and so definitely in terms of the first part of your question, yes, and we only have to look around us. We're getting more tropical cyclones coming at this time of the year, and we're getting more sort of small events, but with quite a lot of high energy and a lot of rain. So that's just that is basically that is where we're going in terms of the whole of New Zealand, in terms of our climate that is slowly changing over time. In terms of work with the regional council asset management team, yeah, we do work definitely with quite closely with Craig in particular, Craig Goodyear, but we also work with the asset management team in terms of developing the models, which then obviously feeds into what level of protection you're going to provide and how that's going to be provided.
So would we expect there to be a response from our asset management people in particular, and possibly from the other council, for example, Napier City's co-management of our drainage network, and in Hastings. So what are their responses to this growing? Well, have you elevated the threat, and what are they saying about that?
Yeah. So they, both the regional council and Napier City Council, if I use those as an example, but all the councils are the same, do build all of this into their asset management plans, long-term asset management plans. So Napier is definitely looking a lot closer at this than what it has in the past, and is definitely looking at a more resilient Napier in terms of their assets, and that's right across their assets, not just infrastructure around stormwater. It's right across other assets as well.
And what do you see? What positive indicators in their long-term plan are you seeing that are likely to address the problem that you've identified?
I can't comment on their long-term plans, sorry, but what I can say is that definitely in my work with their asset management team, that is definitely becoming front of mind a lot more, and it is definitely something that when they are doing their asset management plans that they are building into that.
Have we got a role to play? Perhaps James might answer this. Have we a role to play to input into that and to advocate, facilitate and hold to account for investments that look like that?
Certainly in terms of advocacy through the civil defence structure, I think we've got a role, and I think in processes like the coastal hazards strategy work, we are working alongside those other councils to define the risk and ensure that there's a mitigation pathway being supported. I think there is an opportunity for the regional council to show greater leadership in this regard, and that's something which we've started a conversation internally about, particularly as we migrate towards the next long-term plan around climate change mitigation adaptation. And as foreshadowed, we do expect to see a coastal hazards package as well as Heritonga Plains flood protection upgrade as a key cornerstone of the next long-term plan. And we will need strong buy-in from the TAs and participation in those two areas of work. With respect to holding to account, our strongest lever is the regional policy statement, and within Ian's work program is work with Tom's team around an upgrade of the regional policy statement to more strongly reflect the growing risk profile around climate change hazards in particular. It is a requirement of the Resource Management Act that the territorial authorities give effect to the regional policy statement. So that is our strongest lever, and that flows down into the district plans. So that work is starting to be formed up between the civil defence team and our planning team, and we'll need to take the TAs on a bit of a journey in terms of the next generation of the district plans.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if we could just indulge me for one more question. I just want to go to this being your sort of first year of, total ownership of the CDEM space.
Yep.
Can I just go back to some of the earlier concerns around the residual responsibilities of the TAs in terms of their civil defence management? Are you in a position to identify resources that those councils, respective councils, are applying, notwithstanding the regional approach that's now in place?
Sure. So most definitely in terms of staff time for training, and so I'm looking across the whole of what we call the 4 Rs. So I'm just looking at the moment, just talking about response. Definitely the councils are putting a lot more effort into that and are still supplying staff and also supplying their facilities as well. So that was always a separate matter. They have to have their own facilities, their operation centres and the rest of it. So that's definitely happening. I think also, just as a general comment, definitely at the governance level and also at the management level, there is a lot more effort being put into supporting the group in achieving what it needs to achieve. And I think a good example of that is actually Napier City Council, who have actually been holding workshops which we've helped them to run around how do they develop a more resilient city moving forward. And that's a long-term view which they're going to have to take, and it's a marathon, not a sprint, I suppose is what I'd say. So they're definitely in terms of their responsibilities around, the other part of their responsibilities around their lifelines. So all of the councils are responsible for providing essential services, essentially, and they are responsible under the Civil Defence Act to get those up and running as quickly as possible after an event. There's still a little bit more work in progress with some of the councils around their business continuance planning, but we're working with them on that as well. I know that both this council, in terms of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, and Napier City Council is doing quite a bit of work around their business continuance planning as well, around their assets.
Can I follow up? I mean, a lot of the discussion around this whole area has to do with seems to focus on infrastructure threat and that sort of thing, and then maybe secondly on public awareness of what the public is supposed to do in certain events. But in your discussion of your KPIs here, the area that you say is lacking is actually response to. If I'm reading it correctly, it seems it's the response procedures of the collective of agencies and so forth that would actually have to respond to a disaster of some sort. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I think that's just a function of time and where we're at. So we've only just, the shared sort of service approach really only took effect from sort of mid last year. So there is a lot of work going on at the moment, and there was a lot of reporting. We had the coordinating executives meeting yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, Monday, sorry, and there was a lot of that more detailed operational sort of procedures, how we're going to operate during an emergency as a collective, including the emergency services, what's our mode of operation in an emergency. So I think it's just because this report is obviously goes up to July of last year. There's actually been a lot of work done between July last year and now, so we are making progress in those areas.
Just one last follow-up on that. We had a little side conversation at lunch about how stressed our health system is, particularly the hospital, and those executives. Those folks would obviously have a paramount role to play in all this. Are they up to it?
I think our relationship with, and look, to be honest, our relationship with health is still work in progress. I think they have a huge, as you say, they have a huge part to play in response to an emergency. The hospital itself and their various agencies do have quite good emergency planning for mass casualties and those sorts of things. But we would like to work with them more on the more broader sort of civil defence, because the DHB is operating across a lot wider than just the hospital. So that is still work in progress. And in fact, I was just working on something today with our welfare manager as to how we were going to actually better engage with health in Hawke's Bay.
We do have Dr. Jones on the coordinating executive group representing the DHB, and at our meeting on Monday, we did get presented with an analysis of some of the critical weaknesses in the region with respect to lifelines, etc., and that included an analysis of the DHB's capability to respond in an emergency. I think it's fair to say that some of the infrastructure at the DHB is in need of further investment. It's getting a bit tired, and when that capital investment's undertaken, they will be in a stronger position, particularly with respect to the number of operating theatres and the like, to respond to an event when it happens.
Is there any obligation put on primary care providers? I mean, is there a role that they are expected to play?
Yes. Yes. So they have a role in the national plan, and they are a lead agency in certain events as well. So that's health. So pandemic, for example, is where they are a lead agency. So they are an emergency service, essentially.
So it's all hands on deck if there's a...
That's reasonably well planned, and I think the experience of the Havelock North water crisis was that the pharmacies and the GPs provided the critical face to the health system, and that worked pretty well. So there's good communication flows between the DHB and those parts of the system. So it's probably a strength, to be honest, of our regional capacity to respond. It's probably more at that acute end where, we if there was a major event, we'd be very much overwhelmed in terms of the capacity.
Do we have a mover? You got a question?
Just a quick brief question, Chair, through you. The events that happened down in Christchurch on the 15th, I know that a number of different policies you've brought to us. Terrorism is one of the issues that you deal with. I take it that at some stage you'll be getting hold of your colleagues down in Christchurch to see if there's any lessons that can be learnt and so on.
So as part of their response, all of government response to that incident, I was involved in the national telephone conferences because they activated the National Crisis Management Centre underneath the Beehive, and there were already some lessons that I picked up through that. But all of the group managers, we meet 2 or 3 times a year, and we go through any events that have happened and take learnings from that. So most definitely.
I'm happy to move, Chair.
Second up. Do you wish to speak, Paul?
No?
Tom? Anyone wish to speak? All I do. Ian, since you've taken over and you've managed to get through this council that we were going to fund it through a single source, I think you've done a really great job in preparing this province for readiness. And a lot of it is due to your leadership. And I just want to formally congratulate you and thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Okay, all those in favour of receiving this report? Aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you very much, Ian. Item 15, significant activities. You might have come, are you going to come up to the front?
We've got
The big team here, all the guns, eh?
most of our group managers are here to answer any questions.
Are you not coming up in front of
councillors
you?
have.
Oh, sorry. I know you're doing your work, you're just ignoring us. Okay, we're going to go straight to questions, guys. Tom?
Item 23, what is the Pandora Pond coal minder novel technology that's into that?
Yeah.
So a coal minder is effectively a new bit of instrumentation that allows real-time analysis of water for bacterial presence. So it's a bit of equipment that's been around for a number of years. It's been further refined and developed, so instead of waiting 24 hours, you can have samples returned within 6 minutes to say whether there's fecal contamination in the water or not. So what we're looking to do is to see whether we can use the technology to operate remotely in areas like Pandora and provide real-time warnings to the public about the risks of fecal contamination. So effectively provide a traffic light kind of indicator, because as you'll appreciate, we do our sampling irregularly and it takes time for the samples to be returned. So by the time we've found that there's a problem in the water, people have already had 1 or 2 days of contact. So coal mining provides an opportunity for us to use technology to provide more real-time information immediately to the public to help them in their assessment of risk and decisions about whether they want to.
So we can call off triathlons with more advance notice.
Well, you can make more informed choices about whether those things carry on or not, because you'll have an indication as to whether the fecal contamination is present or not.
Certainly when we had the most recent Tremaines triathlon, there was a small amount of rainfall literally the day before, and some consternation among the organisers about whether or not to proceed. This would, and we were outside the window to be able to do the normal testing. This would enable us to give advice right up to within minutes of the event starting. And so there had to be an educated guess in that example, and this takes the guesswork out of it.
But just to follow that on before I go to other questions, the next one, 24, says that it's the birds.
Wow.
It was in that event late last year.
And that's what the coal miner won't do, is tell you the source. So our more in-depth studies tell us the source. It'll just tell you whether there is fecal contamination present or not. And of course, if it's avian, the risks are different than if they're human or ruminant. No, there's no way around a fast track of that, other than what we would like to be able to do in time is to minimise the likelihood of impact from human or ruminant sources, so that if faecal contamination is present, it's more likely to be birds than anything else.
Do you think the public is aware, even thinks about the birds?
No, they don't. and this is one of the problems with and the risk of opening up a debate about swimmability. This is one of the risks of communicating complex science to the public and understanding what the actual risks are and what the contributors to those risks are and how much we can influence or manage. So, look, if we're successful in our endeavours to make the Ahuriri estuary a better ecological environment than it is now, I would fully expect we'll have a hell of a lot more birds. And with that will come a lot more bird fecal contamination. And that's just, that's nature. And with it, we would need to convey and communicate to the public that that's what's going on. That doesn't represent a failing in any management system. It's just what happens.
Can I add to
Sticking with that turf, can I go to 46?
Can I just add to that comment about the public's awareness of that, Chair? Building on from Ian's comments, I think there is a rising awareness that the estuary itself, or certainly Pandora, is it the Pandora Pond, is at the lower end of a bird sanctuary, and that if we increase the number, increase the better the environment in there, we're going to increase the number of birds. In which case, there's going to be an increased risk of fecal contamination from avian sources. I wouldn't say it's uniform throughout the city, but certainly it's a topic that people are becoming more aware of than what they were in the past.
Well, that's good. Tom, 46 you're going to go to?
46, just a question. What is why are they on hold?
A couple of reasons. The two Napier City Council ones are the ones on the southern side of the estuary. They're on hold waiting for feedback from tangata whenua, particularly members of Mana Ahuriri about that. The Land Corp ones are north of the estuary. We have asked for further information on theirs and are just awaiting that.
Thank you.
Neil? Paul. Randy? We've got Debbie, then Alan, then back to you. Debbie?
Right. I'm back on the first page, and I'm just interested in the 29 applications for the erosion control. Geographically, are they north, south? Where are they?
There's a reasonably good mix, Councillor Hewitt. I don't have exactly those details in front of me.
How are we going in terms of...
Look, the spread isn't absolutely uniform. There's probably more to the south than there is in the middle, and slightly more to the north than there is in the middle. The middle area seems to have less. Probably reflecting, not surprisingly, that we've been reasonably active in the Tuki catchment to this point. There's a lot of people who are already engaged and wanting to do stuff, and we're just connecting into that.
Are we targeting people because we've got the information, or are they coming to us?
There's a bit of both. So we've in the development of our engagement process, we've been deliberate in not running what we'd call a campaign, because we didn't want to be overwhelmed and unable to respond to people. So it's been a little bit organic, and we've had a number of instances where people have had activity start in an area, and their neighbours have talked to them about it, and then they've phoned us and got involved as well. And that's kind of how we're preferring this to work at the moment. There's a little bit of targeting people who we know we've worked with in the past who want to do something that we can go to and say, hey, we can make it go faster now, and then word of mouth, just spreading it organically as we get ourselves prepared for it. And look, the other comment I make just in regards to this has far exceeded my expectations at this point in time, given that we're 9 months into the new body of work. There's been an enormous amount of effort at the front end to stand up systems and processes to support it, to the point where I may well be coming back to you at some point soon and asking to bring forward some of the borrowing to support this, which I think would be a nice problem to have. So we're kind of carefully managing what we're able to respond to alongside interest that's coming just organically through the door.
I just might add, some of these are really significant. They're, over $100,000 worth of funding on our side, matched by landowners in terms of their contribution, etc. Involving tens of thousands of plants and many kilometres of fencing, and all that will be wrapped up in a report to the ENS committee in June, which will give you a complete picture of what we've achieved in the year to date. So I'd expect there'll be plenty more in the pipeline than what you're seeing here.
Alan.
Further to 29, who is Te Uru Raka?
That's a division of the Ministry for Primary Industries. It's the New Zealand Forestry Service, created by the current government. Its
purpose is what?
It's to promote forestry in New Zealand. It administers the government's forestry grants and does forestry policy for government as well.
Okay.
Paul, and then I'll come round.
Thank you, Chair. Number 42, Panpac's outfall leak. Mentioned there a verbal update provided as to whether or not the works has been completed on the repairs. Do we know if that's actually happened yet or not?
I can give you an update. The insertion of the sleeve began on Monday, and depending on the weather conditions, they were hoping to be able to confirm its success by the end of this week. The forecast isn't flash in terms of swell, so we may just have to, wait a few days longer. But as the written paper says here, the expert has arrived from overseas. The work has begun on the final stage of repair, and hopefully within days rather than longer, we will, have confirmation that it's been completed and is successful.
Excellent. That's good news to hear. Through you, Chair, the other question, James, in your press release on your decision, you mentioned that Panpac is looking to replace the pipe in the near future. That's over and above what they were looking at doing under their new resource consent, which was the extension.
That's correct.
Is that correct? And have you did you get a feel for what they meant by the near future?
I'm told by the Chief Executive of Panpac that they have begun the work on costing and preliminary design of a new pipeline. So it's when we say near future, we mean within the coming financial year.
And I assume that there will be an application for a resource consent for that, either through us or for the Hastings District Council?
There will most definitely.
Yep. Okay.
Neil.
Can I take you back to 24 on the Marine Coast and the fecal monitoring? Are you familiar with the precise location of the monitoring for Penwood Pond?
Is in
That was presented to us previously, but I just...
Is in the sampling, the actual
Sampling.
location of the pond
Yeah.
itself. I couldn't tell off the top of my head. The pond's not very big, so it's somewhere off the shore in the pond.
Where I'm leading to with this question is monitoring further in towards the inner harbour and waterway around the marina, going out to the port entrance and breakwater. I'm taking it that there's no monitoring there of fecal matter. And so my next question is, can we come back with a report that tells us what the potential to monitor the inner harbour is, any cost implications, etc., and can it be fitted into the this current science program? And perhaps a third tranche to that is, what is the capacity for us to engage with the port, boat users, etc., to undertake comprehensive monitoring and management around that whole inner harbour area?
Yep. In terms of the principle and where the sites are selected, they're selected for our areas of high contact recreation. So the pond is obviously a place that has a lot of contact recreation. The short answer is we can monitor wherever we want. There's obviously the cost associated with it, and it's really understanding what are the risks that you're wanting to address by selecting your sample sites, and what further knowledge would you gain about the system by adding monitoring in. So we could certainly consider that. One of the things I would add, and perhaps that is we have recently workshopped with Napier City Council staff on a range of things related to the estuary. One of the areas that's been clearly identified in that workshop session was the need for, if you like, a network, monitoring network review across ourselves and the City Council, Department of Conservation, Hastings District Council, all the agencies involved in the estuary. Who's doing what where? Is that the most effective way of doing it, and the best places for us to have the information to inform management actions and perhaps policy in time. So I suspect the questions you're asking will come out of that network review, which is something we'll do collaboratively with those parties, and bring it back to say, well, look, this is what we want to do differently if there's a resourcing implication, because ideally we'll fit it into our existing work rather than just adding more in.
Sure. What's the time frame for that?
We haven't landed a time frame yet.
Is it feasible? You know, is it, and how difficult would it be to bring back some sort of report at this or Environment Services Committee meeting to say this is a possibility or not of that inner harbour coastal marine and monitoring within our current scope of activities?
Look, anything's possible. What my preference would be to do it in that sort of aligned and coherent way. Just recognising that we've embarked on a better partnership with the City Council and others in this space. So yeah, look, we could bring you back a very narrow HBRC view of that, but I don't think that would help us in the longer term. I think if you would give me a little bit of time to bring you back a more comprehensive view of that, it would be better for us. Yeah.
Can we update the timing at some?
Well, how about we endeavour to provide an initial view of that by the June E&S? And hopefully Mrs. Hooper's captured that in the minutes and she'll remind me of that.
Do we have a mover for recommendation that we receive?
No.
Alan?
Second, Chair.
And second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
You didn't even have to answer one question, Chris. Oh, well, I'll make sure that doesn't happen next time. We're on to you.
We'll ask them about eels next time, Chair.
NS committee. It's coming.
Okay, we'll move to minor items. We had two. I don't see who's written them down here. Climate change rally. Climate change rally.
Chair, I've got some photos I just wanted to put up on the...
Oh, yeah.
Show to everyone?
Definitely, we love pictures.
Right, that's right.
Show and tell.
Can't tell you. Yeah. I wrote those all down. I don't know where. Okay, then, Councillor Bay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair.
How many pictures you got?
Oh, not very many.
Is this the kids that were wagging school?
Interesting one. I actually attended the kids' climate change rally, and for all these kids, I actually had to ask them if I could take their photo. And one of the questions I asked them when I was getting their permission was, "How do you feel about wagging school?" And none of them said that they actually felt like they were wagging. They were actually trying to get a message across that governments and local authorities weren't acting fast enough on dealing with issues of climate change.
Oh, gee, even Iona.
Somebody might recognise that particular uniform.
It's Woodford.
Woodford, is it?
Yeah.
Should be in school.
Of course, I'm not afraid of it.
How many? How many kids were there, Paul?
I reckon there might have been a couple of hundred all up.
Yeah.
Of course, it was a funny day because it went from this in the morning to obviously what happened down in Christchurch in the afternoon, and it was all a bit weird. But like I say, one of the things that became pretty obvious to me is that there's a lack of understanding about what government and what we're doing as a council around the issue of climate change, and I know we're doing an awful lot, so it's not like we're not doing anything. So I just wondered if we're ever at some stage going, and it's very easy, it's difficult to find that information as to what we're actually doing, and I'm wondering if there's any way that we can perhaps improve that for the public. So I suppose that's a question for you, James.
Yeah, so when we had a workshop on the totality of our climate change work, it was at the end of last year actually, I think it was council paper, we suggested that the council produces an annual climate change report that tells a consolidated story around our activities, and obviously that would have a highlight on our webpage as well. So look, I take the point, I don't think we're communicating this as well as we could. So Tom Skirman's team's charged with bringing that forward, and you can expect that to come through in the coming months.
Marvellous. That was it.
No, great, Paul.
Thank you for that.
And thanks for attending on our behalf. Did you make a speech?
No, I didn't. My daughter didn't take a day off school either. She said, "Oh, I'm not going to do that because you might get up and talk, Dad," and she gets all embarrassed. But no, it was great fun, and it was really good to see the future. Our kids out there engaged in these issues.
Could you take a comment on that, please?
Okay, Tom. Only because it's you.
At the Balance Awards, I sat opposite someone who I will not identify further, who was a corporate sponsor of one of the awards,
Yeah, I know the chap.
who harangued us on the stupidity of focusing on climate change in New Zealand, because New Zealand was such a trivial contributor to the overall state of affairs, 0.2% or whatever the number is. I was just dumbfounded because it was an evening of otherwise super impressive people getting up, getting awards, describing what they were doing. And I know Neil's view about whether we should be involved in those or not, and I have some of that skepticism, but all three of the finalists were doing brilliant things, and yet here's a guy who's sponsoring one of the awards.
And you didn't even react, did you, Tom? You just
climbing out from under a rock. I
Chardonnay.
just buried my head in my cleat, and I didn't want to engage with this guy.
Okay. Well, do we have another? Thanks, Tom. Do we have it? Was there only one item?
Tom had one too.
Oh, Tom had one. Oh, okay.
On the same, so you probably will have read by now the Parliamentary Commissioner has put out a report on climate change and
Tree planting.
essentially wanting to segregate tree planting and apply that against biological emissions and so forth. I was just raising now, we're going to get a presentation that would give us an opportunity at the Environment Committee to inquiry into this, but it sounds like the government has already preemptively put the whammy on this, and it's not going to be the government policy, but if it were, would it have an impact on our tree planting aspirations, or would it have any bearing if that were the policy adopted?
I don't know. Do you want to
So that
answer
could come up.
Yeah, that will come up.
We can give you some advice on the NS committee on that. Yep.
There's lots of other. The reason for that report to your committee, Tom, is there's so many other things that will have an impact on what we do. And I think they're economically driven, the market driven. Okay, thank you, everybody. That's the end of our official meeting. Would someone move us in? Would someone move us into public exclusion, please?
I'll move that, Richard, Chair.
Thank you. Someone second? Second. Those in favour? Aye. Against? Tom's always against. So we'll move into public exclusion.